Good Saturday morning. Today is December 17th, okay? And it's 1 week before, of course, Christmas Eve, December 24th, okay? In the church, it gives us Genesis, the book of Genesis, and also from Matthew's gospel, the genealogy of Christ. See, that the whole Judaic tradition, the whole story, okay, leads to Christ. See, that's what he goes by. It goes from Abraham to Christ. See, that's interesting. Remember who Matthew is writing for is Christian Jews, and he's saying everything that is in our story. He's a Jew. Leads to Christ. The fulfillment of the whole messianic promise begun by Abraham and completed in Christ. You see, and therefore the church. And I think of that as we think about Christmas. Christmas is a very special time of the year. And I think of this. I think about this a lot now because it's a time it's probably the primordial time of the family. Not in all families. Sometimes it's the worst time for families when there's loss or the family's been fractured. But by and large, it's because I think as little children, our Santa Claus, it's a time of such anticipation and excitement. It's a wonderful time of the year. And, often we complain about its being secularized. That doesn't bother me at all because it's such a time of love, generosity. You see people spending money they can't afford that. And they do it, they're buying gifts for their family. They're going out of the way. They're trying to express love through gift giving, often putting themselves in debt to do so. How could you not rejoice in the beauty of that and the goodness of it? And to my mind, even its redemptive power. How many times has Christmas been a time when we would heal the wounds in ours by a very special gift? We reach back to someone whom we've become estranged from or something and try to make whole a fractured part. And I remember it with such vividness, the Christmases we had as kids growing up, and it was always the Christmas tree and the gifts and all the rest, but it was my father's dinner. You had to be there to experience it. I think I've told you this 100 times already, I don't know. But my dad was a restaurant guy, he was a waiter. And so they worked on every day, they worked on the holidays. But the only holiday that the Tivoli was closed was Christmas. And so on Christmas Day, it was a family day. My grandmother was alive at the time, but even after she died in 66, and these dinners went on after that, okay? We used to have, my father put them off until I came home so that I could be part of it, okay? So it wasn't necessarily Christmas Day, but for years, my whole lifetime of growing up was Christmas Day. And then we would have dinner with the family. So it's not only my grandmother, my family, my mother, father, and Pete, okay, my brother, but also all my uncles and aunts and cousins and special friends. And when we were dating, would be our girlfriends, okay? Yeah, you had to see it. And friends of the family would come and participate either in the preprandials, the cocktails beforehand, or the dessert afterwards. These dinners would begin right after church. So it'd be around 11 o'clock in the morning. People would come in, and sometimes it would come just for the preprandials and then leave, or the family would come together. So my mother would make the hors d'oeuvres. The only thing she knew how to make was hors d'oeuvres. My mother couldn't boil water, okay, but she made a great hors d'oeuvre. So anyway, we'd come for that, and around 1 o'clock, we would sit down for dinner, and it would be a multi-course dinner. The pasta was made by my grandmother. My father made the roast beef. My aunts made the salads, this and that. And it went on and on. That dinner would go on for many hours. When we were little children, late in the afternoon, around 3 or 4, 2 or 3 hours into the dinner, we would leave. The kids go out and play, okay, whatever it would be. But everyone else stayed, and then we would come back again. The adults would stay, and it was during the dessert time, as it were, the quiet time, we all stayed at the table. And then we would come back together again. That dinner would go from around 11 in the morning to 6 or 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night. That's a festa. It's a dinner. It's one of a kind. You had to be there. And conversation was always, even among where there was tension could be some tension among the relatives. No one was allowed to raise their voice at the table. No one was allowed to get out of line. That's the truth. You couldn't argue with somebody. It was a time in which we came together, and often it was a healing time. And the reason is there were often in-laws that didn't get along, but you got along at that table. I remember one time, Uncle Harry was the most fun because he'd start to sing. Oh my God, you had to be there. This was 3 or 4 hours into it, okay? And Uncle Harry would start to sing, and I never forget it because I still hear that song in my memory. And every so often I hear Frank Sinatra or somebody sing Me and My Shadow. And he would start singing it. He was an entertainer. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. You had to be, and Aunt Clara, they were cousins, okay? My mother's cousin, Clara, she was fun looking to happen, okay? So she and Uncle Harry, related only by law, by marriage, okay? Okay, cousins through marriage. They would start singing. Oh my God, pure entertainment. My mother would be laughing all the way through. You had to be there. It was a festa. It's what the Eucharist is supposed to be. It's the coming together of a family. See? I remember that with such vividness. Very hard to do that because you have to understand what it is to eat together, to be a family of friends together, friends and relatives together, enjoying the meal. I remember, though, you could not get out of line. I think one time I said something, I got out of line. I was immediately straightened out. You had to know that, okay? You didn't argue at the table, but you had to mind your manners. We drank so much wine, honest to God, but you could never get drunk. You were absolutely responsible for your behavior. Think of the reading of the Gospels. You were responsible for your behavior. See? And I remember one time Uncle Harry, it was Uncle Harry too, he was entertaining us, and just by the slip of his hand, he knocked the glass over. He didn't break it, just knocked it over. You could hear a pin drop. It was just like that. You can't knock a glass over. My father, very stern moment. See? Yeah. Think of that as a symbol, even when it's an accident. It was no big deal. But it was at that moment. We knew that was excessive. That was too much. There was too much fun at the table. See? Whatever you want to say. There was something, I missed that. But I also see it as a model of the church and the Eucharist. We come together as a family. The church comes together with people of God. There's no place in there for violence. We come together in peace and share the table of the Lord. That's really true. That's really true. Would that we practiced it. Would that we could take my father's Christmas dinner and in some way extend it to the world in such a manner that when we sit down together, friends together, family together. No more fighting, but a tremendous freedom of spirit. We're not together out of fear or just obeying rules. We come together out of the intimacy and the adventure of love itself. And occasionally we knock a glass over, but only rarely and only occasionally. It's neat.